Hello there, what is going on, everybody? Today we are going to be talking about how to cloak in Star Trek Into the Unknown. We're going to tell you everything you need to know about cloaking, how it works, who can cloak, when you can cloak, the pros and cons to cloaking, as well as when you might want to cloak and when you might not want to cloak, because there's definitely some balance as it applies to cloaking right now, and there's definitely some good things and advantages to it, and then there's also a ton of disadvantages to sort of incentivize you to stay visible for as much as possible. We're going to be going into all of this and the tips and tricks on best practices for cloaking as well. Hopefully you find this very useful. If you like what you see here, we have lots of games about Star Trek Into the Unknown, other sci-fi games as well, lots of spaceship games, all kinds of, and everything in between. We'd love to have you stick around. We're currently doing the 12 Days of Life Day giveaway for all the month of December. Lots of giveaways are going to be happening all throughout December. We have 12 giveaways planned. You just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my other videos to enter to win one of those giveaways. And plus, we do giveaways all the time, so I'd love to have you stick around. So there are currently only 3 ships that can cloak right now. That's currently the Klingon Vorcha and the Klingon Bird of Prey, as well as the Defiant. Only the Defiant specifically through upgrade cards tied to its title. But there will be more cloaked ships that will come to the game as more Klingon ships arrive. And of course, when the Romulans come, of course, they'll be cloaking as well. So if you're watching this in the future coming back, thanks for stepping back through time. How's the future from now? Did we make it? Are things okay? Did the aliens actually come? Who knows? Also want to point out one thing, that the cloaked Bird of Prey alternate color scheme ship doesn't actually represent a cloaked ship. It actually represents in-game. If you were to use this in-game, this would be a visible ship. You would be using the wake marker to indicate when the ship is cloaked. So keep that in mind, that this is just a visual upgrade, doesn't actually have a gameplay value. So if you're doing that, just keep that in mind. Let's talk about how you will cloak. So the cloak action is actually located on the shipboards themselves. They're located in the helm section, so you have to have a helmsman activate cloak, which does mean that if you are going to be moving and doing impulse maneuvers, you won't also be able to then cloak unless you use a standby action or some combination thereof, or other special shenanigans that we'll get into later, because there's other ways that you can get cloaked. As you can see, the cloak action is expensive, though. In the case of the Vorcha, it requires 2 tricorder symbols and 2 power already on top of everything else, right? So this is going to be an expensive action. A lot of your better, like impulse action, you can get away without spending any extra of your reserve power. But for the cloak, you're going to have to spend at least 2 and possibly more depending on who you have at your helm. Now, this isn't the case for every ship. Cloak costs do differ wildly, but they tend to be still expensive. For example, the Bird of Prey still wants 2 reserve power, but only 1 tricorder, so it's a little less power consuming to cloak a Bird of Prey than a much larger Vorcha. I want to also look at the Defiance card, for example, which is a helm upgrade, so you're still doing it from the helm. On the Defiance, it only costs 1 power, but you will need a double tricorder if you want to get by with only using 1 reserve power. But you're going to take that action from the helm. So what does that even mean? In short, when you cloak, you're going to be replacing your ship with this wake marker. You can be precise by doing that by putting this little marker right here, lining that up, and then swapping it in with the wake marker so that the rear line there lines up with the center, and then boom, you are now cloaked, and that's where you are. You're then going to take this stealth tracker and pick your actual position, because you're going to be somewhere around this thing, but not actually here. You're never actually on this exact spot. Well, almost never. There is some cases where you could be, but generally you're never on this exact spot. Now, as soon as I cloak and remove my ship from the board, I'm picking its true position at this point. And the true position is going to be along A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or H. It's going to be in one of these directions. I won't actually be cloaking straight ahead or straight to the left or straight back. I'm going to be in one of these angles. And I'm going to use the stealth tracker to document where my true position is. And this is a double-sided token. Now, you want to be careful with these two because you will be revealing these windows at certain points throughout the game. We'll talk about that in a minute. But everything's color coded. So let's just say, for example, I want it to be along H. I wanted to kind of go forward, and I wanted to be pretty far out. So maybe you can go up to 6 inches out, but let's just say I wanted to be 5 inches out. And what I would do is I would then just basically take my tracker here. I would set this to H along the top, and I would set this to 5. And boom, now I've just said I am at H5. We cannot change that at this point. We're going to just set that down. And now I'll probably put this on the ship board itself, but I'm just going to leave it here for right now. Now I am truly at H5. I don't actually have to measure. I don't have to put my ship there. Don't even have to physically fit my ship there, for example. Like if, let's just say there was another ship there, doesn't mean that I can't cloak and say that that's my true position. You are actually allowed to overlap. The problem is when you decloak, if you're overlapping, that's when the problem comes in. But when you cloak, you can say that that's where you want your true position to be. If you need a in-universe explanation, it's the idea is that that's where we're heading. We're flying to that, and we're maybe above or below it or something like that. But yes, you are allowed to say your true position is in a place that would overlap something else. It won't be a problem until you decloak. A couple of other things about cloaking. You have to be at a green status, or specifically a status that has the cloaking symbol here available. Much like launching probes or torpedoes, the status has to be one that works, and currently green alert statuses tend to have those. If we go into yellow, you'll notice we lose that. Also, if you are sensor locked, if you cloak, you're going to lose your sensor lock. Your instrument's power is going to be set to 0 when you're cloaked, and your sensors and comms are going to be reduced to 2 and cannot be increased further. So there's definitely some restrictions with cloaking. You also can only do a forward impulse maneuver or a come about maneuver. You can't do any of the other fancy maneuvering if you're trying to fly around while cloaked. So if you were trying to do backwards and strafing maneuvers and stuff like that, you're going to have to decloak in order to do all of that. There are going to be some things that force you to reveal your telemetry, and your telemetry dials are your distance and position. And whether I'm having to prove position, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, or as a result of the new detect cloak action that every new ship has. The detect cloak action is going to be from the instruments panel. It's something that every ship can attempt to do right now, and if they are successful, you will have to reveal one of your telemetry dials. Now, to do that, you're just going to flip one of these over. I might. In the case of, now let's just remember, I said I was at H5. Oops, let me set that very clear. So I was at H5, right? So if I'm at H5, I might not want my opponent to know I'm at H. So I might just say, you know what? I'm at red for distance. Now that tells my opponent a lot more about where I'm not than where I am. And so in this case, then my opponent would know, okay, so you're not within 3 inches of this, so you're farther out. So maybe setting up on this particular wake marker, you know, it's kind of safe, kind of close to that. So that gives them a little bit of knowledge. Now, if they can do that again, and I have to reveal another one, then they're going to have a lot more information, because I might not want them to see the position telemetry. But then, if I were to reveal that, that would say I was in blue, which we know is in the blue upper left quadrant. And that still wouldn't be my exact position. They would just know that I was somewhere probably around here as opposed to anywhere else. And that gives them some information, but not perfect information. Although if you get both, that is pretty good. So there's also the ability where we might have to prove position, and there's a couple of use cases for that. We need to talk about proving position, but before I talk about proving position, I want to explain how you decloak, because cloaking and decloaking are done very differently. So now that I've flown around, maybe I've stayed cloaked for a few turns, I set my thing to H5 again, and I want to decloak. Decloaking is a reaction you can do at the start of your activation if you haven't cloaked already. This is going to be something that we're going to do in this case. So I had said I was at H5. I'm going to measure. Now, the interesting thing is you actually measure along this line, but from the outside of the H in this case. This is where we're going to actually start measuring from. And then I will place my guy at the 5, like so. Now, the interesting thing about this is I always have to be facing the same way that this stealth marker is, the wake marker is facing. So that forward arrow between the A and the H, this is the one at 12 o'clock, this is the way my ship is going. So I can't like turn around and be like, aha, I have you in your, I can't decloak like that. like I still have to be facing right there. And so it's going to be touching that back edge of my ship right here on the 5 marker facing the same way. And there we go. I would decloak. I would pick all this stuff up, and my ship would be all the way over here now. And voila! Now, let's just say I couldn't actually decloak because either there was another ship in the way, or maybe it was the edge of the map, or something basically causing an illegal placement. For example, let's say I was at H3 and the Enterprise is right there, and I can't actually get to the actual 3. What would happen is then I would slide back along the tool until there was a valid placement. And if there is no valid placement, so if I was here, I would just slide back until all of a sudden, boom, I could then, as soon as the minimum distance to actually get a valid placement. So I would be stuck doing it right there. But if I was closer and there was no valid placement, my opponent then would get to place me on this. I'd still have to be aligned with it, but I'd have to be on here. So you don't want to give your opponent that ability. So you want to make sure you're not flying this thing right in between too many other ships or too close to the edge of the board, especially if your true position would end up putting you off the board. It's very, very dangerous. So keep that in mind. Make sure you give yourself clearance when you are decloaking. I hadn't done that, and my opponent is trying to force me to decloak. I might have to prove position or be forced to decloak early. There are several ways that I can have to prove position. The most common is going to be with torpedoes, but this can also happen with hazards, and also if you're doing something like if you're warping past something with treacherous or something to that effect. You may have to prove position. So anytime there's a torpedo that is going to detonate within 12 inches of our wake marker, what we're going to do is we're going to have to prove position to prove that this torpedo didn't actually hit us. And so what we will do in this case is we will choose one of our telemetries that hasn't already been revealed and reveal it. If we already have a revealed telemetry, for example, if I already had this one that was revealed, then I wouldn't have to reveal a second one, because if I could already prove position with one, then I'm good to go. However, let's just say I hadn't had any revealed yet, and it was time for me to do that. I'd have to prove that I couldn't be within an inch of this torpedo if it's about to blow up. And this is assuming that he just launched this with a 0 fuse, for example. So in this case, I might reveal that I'm on the blue side, and then what we would do is we would measure, okay, if for wherever you are within blue, is there any position that would put you within 1 inch of here? If, for example, I was on the B side, or if I was on the orange side, A or B, there could, in theory, be a case that it would hit me. So if I was orange, that might not be enough, and then I might have to reveal a second one. And that, if it was red, it would be like, I'm orange, but I'm so far away that I'm beyond an inch, and then that would be enough to clear me. If, for example, it's not enough to clear, so in this case, I was at H5. So let's do another example of a torpedo that could cause me to decloak. So in this case, he suspects I'm over this way. And maybe he suspects I'm here because I've been flying in a certain way that kind of puts this side closer to objectives, or closer to a position where I might decloak and open fire or something like that. So he thinks I'm over here, and I will try to prove position with blue. That's not going to be good enough. Maybe I'll try to prove position with distance. Is that going to potentially be good enough? Because either one of these is still going to potentially have me in a place where I could. Even though I know I'm at 5, and I know that I would be just outside of an inch of this, I can't prove that, because when I'm trying to prove position, I have to take all 3 ranges into consideration. 4, 5, or 6. And if I was at 4, that would have me almost on top of that torpedo. So in this case, I can't prove that I'm clear of the torpedo, and so therefore I must decloak. And in this case, I would reveal I was at H5, and I would decloak at H5, and I'd be right there, which would be just outside of 1 inch of the torpedo, so I'd be okay. But then I would be vulnerable to other things, and counterattacks and things of that sort next turn, and maybe I didn't want to decloak just yet. Now, cloak wake markers are never 100% reliable. For example, I might not always be in deep space, or I might be in the system and you don't know about it. I might look like I'm in the system, but I'm actually not. And the way they represent that is that I can actually decloak into a different system. So if I were at B6, for example, and I chose to decloak, and I were to set this, and all of a sudden now I am in a different area, right? Because I could potentially decloak into this system without actually going through warp. And the idea is I was there all along. That's how I could do that. But there's consequences to doing that, and they are disastrous. If I were to decloak and come out of cloak in a system that's different than where the wake marker is, or in a different zone, like going from a system to deep space or vice versa, one of the things I have to do is I have to set all of my reserve power to 0. It goes straight to 0, regardless of how much. Now, keep in mind, yes, it costs some to cloak, but I don't have to decloak the same turn. So a lot of times I might cloak early and then fly around and, do change alert status a couple of times to where I was like, oh, I'm getting 3 power back now. And all of a sudden I'm kind of building up some weapons power. I'm ready to attack you, hoping to do a huge number of shots. But, and maybe I've got all my power back, and all of a sudden I was forced to decloak early or chose to. So there's a cost to it. I'm going to lose all of my reserve power. Now, if I lose all of my reserve power, that's bad because, again, I can't move, can't recloak, can't warp out of there. I might be able to impulse in a Bird of Prey's case, but again, a lot of ships have power requirements for everything. It also means I have no shields. So if I'm going to take some shots back, I'm going to go down very quickly. If I had no reserve power when I did it, going down to 0 doesn't seem like any kind of penalty, right? Yeah, it's not, because that doesn't happen. If I was already at 0, I'm going to take 3 peril tokens. So yeah, it's a bad thing. Now, the Klingons currently have a really interesting answer for this. Grilka, the officer in this pack, in the Rising Tensions pack, has a very cool ability where she has a reaction if she's in the captain's chair or on a team. After her unit gains 1 or more peril tokens, you can remove up to 3 that it just gained and then gain an inspiration instead, which is a very cool way to deal with that. Now, that is one way to use her. I don't necessarily suggest trying to make this work because a lot of things have to happen. You have to decloak, into a place that's going to be beneficial. You also have to make sure you have no reserve power before this happens, because if you have even 1, you're still just going to go down to 0 and be fine. But this is more of an insurance policy in case that does happen. You can make something out of it. You're still going to be in a position where you have no shields and no extra reserve power to power your weapons even further for that killing blow. It's really just kind of like an emergency situation, but I wanted to mention that because that is kind of cool. Also, a limitation of cloaking is that you cannot decloak if you've cloaked this phase, at least voluntarily. You could be forced to decloak, but you can't use your reaction to decloak, and normally just decloak however you want to. So it's not like you're going to get a ton of extra movement. It is situational extra movement. However, since we're talking about cool and interesting officers, to rule, while we have seen her already, and you may be even familiar with her card, she is that Romulan officer that is going to serve on board the Defiant and help you manage that Romulan cloaking device, if you so choose. Has the remodulate cloak ability, and she says if her ship is cloaked, it decloaks and then cloaks again. Knowing what we know about how far you can get away, this can get you a whole foot of extra positioning. However, you still won't be able to use the reaction to decloak after using remodulate cloak on the same phase. However, this is now a very interesting ability, especially if you suspect your opponent has kind of figured out where you are and has already been forcing you to prove position, and they're narrowing in on you. This can be a great way to dodge those torpedoes before they blow up. So when should you cloak? There are certain ships that I think definitely want to cloak more than others, and there's certain times when I think you want to cloak more than others. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit, starting with the Bird of Prey. Bird of Prey is an excellent ship and an excellent candidate to cloak because of the fact that it is positional. It is very highly like a warship. It wants to be pointed at the enemy. It wants to be shooting forward, forward, forward. If you find that an enemy is on your tail, like so, you might want to cloak and get the heck out of there for self-preservation. However, because cloaking uses a lot of energy, it's always risky. It's hard to do. If you think you might have to cloak, you might not want to fire all those extra weapons. You might want to be sparing with your warp maneuvering and some of the actions that require energy. And if you've already been shot and had your shields drained, you might not be able to. So you may want to cloak early before you get all of your energy drained. So that's something I would suggest for if you're going into a wartime scenario and you're going to be shooting lots of phasers and torpedoes. I think you want the bird of prey to be cloaking a little bit more often than just about anybody else. Similar case with the Defiant, although the Defiant doesn't have to be cloaking, it's definitely a nice option. I think the Defiant is kind of the middle ground on they can use this to drop people off and do missions and get better positioning that way. They can use this to escape if they find themselves outnumbered, but they can also use this to position themselves because they do have some forward-facing cannons as well. On the third end of the spectrum right now, I don't think the Vorcha wants to cloak as much. It's more, it costs a lot more for the Vorcha to be able to cloak, and the Vorcha takes more of a penalty in its sensors and comms range, which are actually one of its best strengths that allow it to, complete missions and actually like win the game and do things. This is the workhorse right now of trying to solve the problems and trying to get things done. This is a diplomatic ship, a ship that can do science and can do a little bit of everything. And cloaking kind of hurts this ship a little bit. It is still forward-facing, and in a wartime scenario, it is still something that you could do if you do end up with enemies behind you. But the best use, I think, for this ship to cloak is to cloak at the beginning of the game. So you can actually deploy cloaked, and this is the final way to cloak that I want to talk about because it's definitely my favorite way, and I think it's strategic, and also it kind of works into an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation or Deep Space Nine, and that, you never see the Klingons coming. They're always kind of start out just kind of decloaking in front of you and saying, "Hello there," Obi-Wan Kenobi style, if you will, or Qapla'. I think if Obi-Wan were a Klingon, he would have said Qapla' in a very cool way. So yes, you can deploy cloaked, and you can start off that way. Now, if you are going to deploy cloaked, you have to pay the full cost right away. In the case of the Vorcha, that is 4 reserve power. However, if you're starting the game this way, that would take you from 7 down to 3. If you're starting the game this way, and again, you're starting at a green status, so you're going to be able to do that, you have a lot of time to get that power back. So you can go to warp. It's going to cost you at least 1 more power. But hey, you know what? If you raise alert to yellow, all of a sudden, boom, you're getting 4 power back this turn. Look at that. You're going to be back up to 6. You're going to be ready to rock and roll at no time. And since there isn't a power cost to decloak, starting off cloaked gives you a lot of time to recoup that power, give yourself a little extra position, make it unclear to your opponent exactly which objectives you're going for first, and also play into the theme of the Klingons or the Romulans once they come out, or any other ship that wants to cloak, whether it's the Defiant going into the Gamma Quadrant or whatever. But I think starting off cloaked is the best way to do it. All right, guys, hopefully that was a good primer on everything you need to know about cloaking, when to cloak, the disadvantages of cloaking, and all of my advice and tips and tricks for making cloaking enhance your games, but not completely take over them. It's definitely a situational thing that you're going to do, and it comes with a steep cost with some penalties, but also some pretty cool and fun rewards. All right, let me know if you have any questions or if there's anything that I missed, because I'm sure I missed something, because there's a lot to it, but I think the rulebook does a pretty good job of summarizing it. And of course, may the force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes. So say we all. The spice must flow. You can't take the sky from me. And always wash your sides.